You can see it in their eyes before they ever say it out loud. The defeated shrug when someone asks about their 401k, the nervous laugh when retirement comes up in conversation, the quiet admission that they're not even thinking about age 65 because they can't afford to think past next month. Right now, millions of young Americans are working full-time jobs, doing everything they're supposed to do, and still asking the same terrifying question: will I ever actually be able to retire? These aren't dramatic exaggerations or worst-case scenarios. They're real people. A 32-year-old teacher who contributes to her retirement account and watches it grow slower than her student loan balance. A warehouse worker in his late 20s who did the math and realized he'd need to save for 60 years to retire comfortably. Couples in their 30s who laugh when asked about retirement planning because they're still trying to figure out how to afford a house. And the truth is, they're not being dramatic. They're being realistic. Because if you've ever searched, can millennials afford to retire, or why can't I save for retirement, you already know what the data shows. The traditional retirement model is breaking down. Pensions have vanished. Social Security looks shakier every year. And the gap between what people need to save and what they can actually save has never been wider. This video isn't about scaring you, it's about showing you why an entire generation is staring at a retirement crisis that didn't exist for their parents. It's about understanding why the old advice doesn't work anymore, how we got to this breaking point, and what it means for young Americans who feel like they're being told to prepare for a future they can't afford. Stay until the end, because understanding why the system is failing is the first step toward finding a way through it. The first thing you hear when you talk to younger workers about retirement isn't optimism or confidence, it's resignation. Not the kind that comes from laziness, but the kind that comes from doing the math and realizing the numbers simply don't add up anymore. In one conversation that perfectly captures this moment, a millennial responds to a financial advisor who tells her to just max out her IRA and invest consistently like previous generations did. Her response is direct: with what money? I can barely cover my rent. Behind the frustration is something deeper, a recognition that the retirement system her parents relied on has fundamentally changed, and not in her favor. And she's right about one thing. The economic structure supporting retirement has shifted in ways that make traditional advice feel almost cruel. In the 1980s and 90s, retirement planning had clear scaffolding. Many workers had pension plans that guaranteed income for life. Social Security was robust enough that people trusted it would be there. Housing was affordable enough that most people owned homes by middle age, building equity that could support them later. Healthcare costs, while not cheap, were manageable enough that medical expenses didn't wipe out savings. Today, adjusted for everything, the retirement picture looks completely different. Pensions have all but disappeared for private sector workers, replaced by 401ks that shift all the risk onto individuals. Social Security's trust fund is projected to be depleted by the mid-2030s, meaning benefits could be cut by roughly 20% unless Congress acts. Housing has become so expensive that many young people won't build home equity until their 40s or 50s, if at all. And healthcare costs have exploded to the point where medical expenses are now one of the leading causes of bankruptcy among retirees. This isn't about blaming anyone. It's about acknowledging that the financial infrastructure beneath retirement security has eroded. Corporate America shifted away from defined benefit pensions to save money, transferring investment risk and longevity risk directly to workers. Wage stagnation means people have less money available to save in the first place. The rising cost of everything from housing to childcare to education squeezes out the surplus income that previous generations could redirect toward retirement accounts. And while baby boomers often had stable, long-term employment with the same company for decades, younger workers face an economy where job hopping is necessary for wage growth, but also means constantly rolling over retirement accounts, paying fees, and losing employer match opportunities during gaps in coverage. The result is a generation caught in a perfect storm. They're told to save 15% of their income for retirement when many are struggling to save anything at all. They're expected to invest for 40 years when they can barely think past the next rent payment. They're advised to rely on compound interest when they don't have the initial capital to let it compound. So when young people say the retirement system is broken, they're not being defeatist. They're being honest. Would you agree that expecting someone drowning in student debt and paying half their income in rent to save aggressively for retirement is unrealistic? For millions of young Americans, retirement isn't an abstract concept they'll worry about later. It's the source of a specific, recurring anxiety that hits every time they open their banking app and see their retirement account balance barely moving. One man in his early 30s captured this perfectly. He opened a Roth IRA 5 years ago, contributes what he can every month, and recently checked his balance. After 5 years of saving, he has less than $12,000. He did the math. At this rate, even with compound growth, he'd have maybe $300,000 by age 65. And financial advisors say you need at least $1 million to retire comfortably, maybe $2 million if you want any cushion. His voice gets quiet when he says, "I don't think I'm ever going to retire. I think I'm just going to work until I physically can't anymore." That isn't pessimism, that's math. The numbers tell a brutal story. Financial experts generally recommend having at least 10 times your annual salary saved by the time you retire. If someone makes $60,000 a year, that's $600,000 minimum. But if you factor in inflation, longer lifespans, and rising healthcare costs, the realistic number climbs closer to 1.2 or 1.5 million. Meanwhile, the median retirement account balance for Americans in their 30s sits around $45,000. Not per person, per household. Many have far less. Some have nothing at all. The gap between what's needed and what people actually have isn't just wide, it's a chasm. Why is this happening? It's not one failure, it's a system of compounding disadvantages. First, younger workers entered the job market during or after the Great Recession, meaning their early earning years, the most critical time for retirement savings, due to compound interest, were marked by unemployment, underemployment, or wages that didn't keep pace with costs. Second, student loan debt has exploded. The average borrower now graduates with close to $35,000 in loans, with many owing far more. That debt doesn't just delay savings, it actively prevents it. Monthly payments of $300, $500, even $1,000 are all money that could be going into retirement accounts, but instead disappears into interest payments. Third, the cost of essentials has risen faster than income. When rent, healthcare, childcare, and transportation consume 70 or 80% of someone's paycheck, there's simply nothing left to save. You can't invest money you don't have. Fourth, employer matches, once a guaranteed benefit for many workers, are now inconsistent. Some companies offer them, some don't. Some require years of vesting before you actually own the matched funds. And gig economy workers, contract workers, and freelancers often have no access to employer retirement plans at all. The impact is generational. Millennials are already significantly behind where Gen X and Boomers were at the same age in terms of retirement savings. Gen Z, just entering the workforce, faces even steeper challenges as costs continue rising and wages struggle to keep up. Without adequate retirement savings, the future becomes precarious. People will have to work longer, dramatically reduce their standard of living in old age, or rely on family support that may not exist. The promise that you could work hard for 40 years and then enjoy a secure retirement is breaking down in real time. And even for those who do manage to save something, there's another problem lurking beneath the surface, one that doesn't get talked about enough, but could wipe out decades of disciplined saving. Let's talk about that next. For many young savers, the anxiety doesn't come from having nothing in retirement accounts. It comes from watching what little they do have get quietly eroded by forces they can't control. Fees, market volatility, and inflation, the invisible enemies of long-term wealth building. One woman recently shared her experience. She's been contributing to her employer's 401k for 7 years, putting in 6% of every paycheck. Her employer matches 3%. On paper, everything looks right. She's doing what she's supposed to do, but when she checked her account recently, she realized something disturbing. After 7 years, her balance had grown far less than she expected. Not because her contributions stopped, but because the market dropped twice during that period and the fees attached to her fund were higher than she'd realized. She wasn't being reckless. She was learning an expensive lesson. Retirement accounts are not guaranteed growth machines. They're subject to market risk, and that risk can devastate people who don't have decades to recover from a downturn. This is one of the fundamental differences between the retirement systems of the past and the present. Pensions were predictable. You knew what you'd get. The company took on the investment risk. If the market crashed, that was their problem, not yours. But with 401ks and IRAs, every bit of market risk lands on the individual worker. When someone in their 20s or 30s experiences a major market correction, they theoretically have time to recover. But if someone is 10 years from retirement and the market drops 30 or 40%, that's catastrophic. And younger workers aren't insulated either because early losses mean less time for compound growth to work. Then there are the fees. Most people don't realize how much they're paying to have their retirement accounts managed. Expense ratios, administrative fees, fund management costs, they all seem small. 0.5% here, 1% there. But over decades, those fees compound just like interest, except they compound against you. A person who invests $500 a month for 30 years at a 7% return would end up with around $600,000. But if fees reduce that return to just 6%, they end up with about 500,000. That's $100,000 lost, not to bad investment choices, but simply to fees. And many people are paying even higher fees without realizing it. Inflation adds another layer of difficulty. Even if your account balance grows, the purchasing power of that money can shrink. If your retirement savings grow at 5% per year, but inflation runs at 3 or 4%, your real growth is minimal. And in years when inflation spikes, like it did recently, savings can actually lose value in real terms, even while the account balance technically increases. All of this creates a painful irony. People are told to invest for retirement because it's the responsible thing to do. They contribute faithfully for years, but between market downturns, fees, and inflation, the money they end up with may be far less than they imagined. And unlike previous generations who had pensions with guaranteed payouts, today's workers bear all of that uncertainty themselves. The psychological toll is significant. People feel like they're doing the right thing, but the system punishes them anyway. They watch their balances fluctuate wildly, lose sleep during market crashes, and wonder if their decades of saving will even matter in the end. If the foundation of your retirement security can be shaken by forces completely outside your control, what does that do to your sense of stability? And when even disciplined savers feel like they're gambling rather than planning, how do you maintain confidence in the future? That brings us to the next challenge, one that makes everything harder. Even if you manage to save, invest wisely, and avoid major losses, there's still one cost that can destroy a retirement plan faster than almost anything else: healthcare. If there's one expense that terrifies people more than anything else when they think about retirement, it's medical costs. You can budget for housing, food, and entertainment, but healthcare in retirement is unpredictable, expensive, and unavoidable. And for younger Americans watching their parents and grandparents struggle with it, the future looks even more daunting. One man shared his family's story. His father worked for 40 years, saved diligently, and retired with what seemed like a solid nest egg. Then his mother got sick. Cancer treatments, surgeries, medications, even with Medicare, the out-of-pocket costs were staggering. Within 3 years, a lifetime of savings was nearly gone. His father, now in his 70s, is talking about going back to work just to cover the bills. That story isn't rare. It's becoming the norm. Healthcare costs in retirement are one of the least discussed but most financially devastating realities facing Americans. A healthy 65-year-old couple retiring today can expect to spend over $300,000 on healthcare throughout retirement. That's not counting long-term care, which can easily add another $100,000 or more if either person needs assisted living or nursing home care. Medicare helps, but it doesn't cover everything. There are premiums, deductibles, co-pays, and significant gaps in coverage, especially for dental, vision, and hearing. Many retirees end up buying supplemental insurance just to fill those gaps, which adds hundreds more per month to their costs. For younger Americans, the picture is even more uncertain. Medicare itself is facing funding shortfalls. Current projections suggest the Medicare Hospital Insurance Trust Fund could be depleted by the early 2030s unless Congress acts. That doesn't mean Medicare will disappear, but it likely means reduced benefits, higher costs, or both. And unlike previous generations who often had retiree health benefits from their employers, today's workers are largely on their own. Very few companies offer health insurance to retirees anymore. That benefit, once common, has been quietly eliminated to cut costs. So when someone retires before they're eligible for Medicare at 65, they have to pay for private insurance entirely out of pocket. That can easily cost over $1,000 per month per person, draining retirement savings before Medicare even kicks in. Then there's long-term care. Most people will need some form of it in their later years, whether it's in-home assistance or a care facility. The average cost of a nursing home now exceeds $90,000 per year. Even in-home care runs tens of thousands annually. And Medicare generally doesn't cover long-term care. Medicaid does, but only after you've spent down almost all your assets. This creates a cruel trap. You save your entire life to have security in old age. Then a health crisis forces you to spend everything you saved just to receive basic care. What's left goes to medical bills, not to enjoying the retirement you worked for. The emotional weight of this is crushing for young people trying to plan ahead. They see their parents or grandparents, people who did everything right, get financially devastated by healthcare costs, and they realize they're heading toward the same system, except with less support, higher costs, and more uncertainty. If saving for 40 years can be wiped out by a few years of medical bills, what's the point of saving at all? That's not a rhetorical question. It's one young Americans are genuinely asking, and it's leading to a dangerous form of fatalism, where people stop planning for retirement altogether because the system feels rigged against them no matter what they do. But healthcare isn't the only uncertainty hanging over retirement. There's another support structure that previous generations relied on, one that's showing serious cracks, and younger workers have no idea if it'll even exist when they need it. Let's talk about Social Security. When older Americans talk about retirement, Social Security is often mentioned as a foundation, a guaranteed income stream that supplements savings and provides a safety net. But when younger Americans hear Social Security, they usually respond with some version of the same sentiment. That won't be there for me. And the frustrating part? They might be right. One college graduate summed it up bluntly. I've been paying into Social Security my entire working life. Every paycheck, money gets taken out for a program I'll probably never benefit from. It feels like paying for someone else's retirement while mine doesn't exist. That sense of betrayal isn't unfounded. Social Security is facing a math problem that's been building for decades. The program works on a pay-as-you-go system. Current workers pay in, and that money immediately goes out to current retirees. It's not a savings account where your contributions sit and grow. It's a transfer system that depends on having enough workers to support the number of retirees, and that ratio is collapsing. When Social Security was created, there were about 16 workers for every retiree. Today, there are fewer than 3, and as baby boomers continue retiring in massive numbers while birth rates decline, that ratio will keep dropping. Fewer workers are being asked to support more retirees for longer periods of time because people are living longer than ever. The numbers are stark. Social Security's Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund is projected to be depleted by 2033. That's less than a decade away. When that happens, the program will only be able to pay out what it takes in from current payroll taxes, which means benefits would be cut by roughly 20 to 25% unless Congress intervenes. For current retirees and those nearing retirement, that's alarming. For younger workers, it's existential. They're paying into a system that might not deliver even a fraction of what they're promised. A 25-year-old today is contributing thousands of dollars every year to a program that, under current projections, will be insolvent before they're eligible to claim benefits. So why don't we just fix it? Because every solution is politically toxic. Raising the retirement age means forcing people to work longer, which hits blue-collar and physically demanding jobs the hardest. Increasing payroll taxes means reducing take-home pay for workers already struggling with stagnant wages. Reducing benefits means breaking promises to people who've paid in their entire lives. Means testing benefits, cutting payments to wealthier retirees creates accusations of punishing success. Every option requires political courage, and that's been in short supply for decades. Instead, both parties have kicked the problem down the road, hoping someone else will have to deal with it. Meanwhile, younger workers lose faith in the system entirely. The psychological impact of this can't be overstated. For previous generations, Social Security wasn't meant to be everything, but it was something. It was a baseline. You knew that even if your savings weren't perfect, Social Security would help cover basic expenses. That certainty allowed people to take more risks, retire a bit earlier, or feel secure knowing they wouldn't be destitute. Younger Americans don't have that certainty. They're told to plan as if Social Security won't exist at all. Financial advisors now routinely tell millennials and Gen Z to assume they'll receive zero Social Security benefits and to plan accordingly. That's not fear-mongering. That's prudent planning given the uncertainty. But here's the impossible math. If you're supposed to save as though Social Security won't exist, you need to save significantly more than previous generations did. Experts suggest you might need to save an additional $200,000 or more to replace the Social Security income you won't receive. And you're supposed to do this while earning less in real terms, paying more for housing, and drowning in student debt. The system is asking young people to do something nearly impossible, save more than their parents did, with less support, fewer guarantees, and higher costs. And when they express doubt that they can pull it off, they're told they're not trying hard enough. If the one public safety net designed to prevent elder poverty is crumbling and private savings aren't keeping pace with costs, what exactly is the plan for an entire generation's retirement? That question leads directly to the most troubling trend of all, the quiet acceptance that retirement itself might not be an option. Let's talk about what that means. Over the past few years, a new phrase has started appearing in conversations among younger workers. It's not said with anger or drama. It's said with a kind of exhausted acceptance. I'll probably just work until I die. That sentence used to be hyperbole, a dark joke people made when they were frustrated. Now, it's showing up in serious financial planning discussions. And the data suggests it's not an exaggeration. It might just be reality. One survey found that more than half of millennials believe they will never be able to retire. Not that retirement will be delayed or harder, that it won't happen at all. They expect to work into their 70s, 80s, or until their health gives out. And Gen Z, just entering the workforce is even more pessimistic. This isn't because young people lack ambition or work ethic. It's because they've done the math. They've looked at their student loan balances, their stagnant wages, their rent that takes half their income, and their retirement accounts that grow slower than inflation. And they've reached a logical, if depressing, conclusion. The traditional retirement model doesn't work for them. Some are trying to find alternative paths. The FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early, has gained traction among younger savers who are willing to live extremely frugally now, in hopes of escaping the workforce in their 40s or 50s. But that approach requires a high income, aggressive saving rates of 50 to 70%, and a willingness to sacrifice most pleasures for decades. It's not accessible to the average worker making 40 or 50,000 a year while drowning in debt. Others are resigned to what's called work-optional retirement, where they assume they'll need part-time income indefinitely just to supplement whatever savings they manage to accumulate. Retirement won't mean stopping work. It'll just mean working less. Maybe. The psychological shift this represents is enormous. For generations, retirement was the reward. You worked hard for 40 years, and then you got to rest. You got to travel, spend time with family, pursue hobbies, enjoy the fruits of your labor. It was the light at the end of the tunnel, the promise that made decades of work feel bearable. But if that promise is gone, what motivates people? If you're told you'll work until you physically can't, what's the point of enduring a job you hate or sacrificing your present for a future that won't come? This is where the mental health crisis and the retirement crisis intersect. Younger workers are experiencing record levels of burnout, anxiety, and depression. And part of that is tied directly to the sense that there's no escape. No matter how hard they work, no matter how responsibly they save, the system is structured in a way that keeps them trapped. They're running on a treadmill that never stops, and the finish line keeps moving further away. Some express this through dark humor, jokes about their retirement plan being hoping to die before the money runs out, or just going out into the woods when I can't work anymore. It's gallows humor, but beneath it is real despair. And that despair is deepening as the cost of living keeps rising while wages stagnate and traditional support systems crumble. There's also a growing resentment, not necessarily toward older generations as individuals, but toward the systems they benefited from and then dismantled. Younger workers see that pensions were eliminated to boost corporate profits. They see that Social Security is being drained without being fixed. They see that housing became an investment vehicle instead of a basic need. And they feel like they're being asked to pick up the bill for a party they weren't invited to. This isn't sustainable. A society where an entire generation expects to work until death is not a stable society. It's a society on the edge of collapse. Economic mobility disappears. Consumer spending, which drives the economy, weakens because people can't afford to spend. Political instability rises because people lose faith in institutions that have failed them. So what happens next? If retirement is becoming unattainable for millions, do we just accept that as the new normal? Or does something eventually have to give? That question brings us to the final piece of this picture. The long-term consequences if nothing changes. When you pull back and look at the full picture, retirement in America isn't just difficult for younger generations. It's structurally broken. And if the system continues on its current path without major reform, the consequences won't just affect individuals. They'll reshape the entire economy and society. Let's start with the most immediate effect. If millions of Americans can't retire, they stay in the workforce. That might sound fine on the surface, but it creates a bottleneck. Older workers occupying positions means fewer opportunities for younger workers to advance. Wage growth stalls because there's less upward mobility. Entry-level and mid-level workers get stuck, unable to move into higher-paying roles because those roles aren't opening up. This isn't about blaming older workers. Many of them don't want to keep working either. They're doing it because they have to. But the effect is the same. A clogged labor market where movement slows and frustration builds. Then there's consumer spending. Retirees typically spend less than working-age adults. But if people never retire and instead work longer while also struggling financially, spending drops even more. Discretionary spending disappears. People stop dining out, traveling, buying new cars, renovating homes. All of that economic activity dries up. And since consumer spending makes up about 70% of the U.S. economy, a prolonged spending decline would trigger serious recessionary pressure. There are also social consequences. Families traditionally relied on retirees for things like childcare, elder care for their own parents, and community involvement. If grandparents are still working full-time into their 70s, who watches the grandkids while parents work? Who takes care of aging relatives who need help? These unpaid but essential roles start to disappear, putting even more strain on families already stretched thin. The healthcare system will also be overwhelmed. An aging population that can't afford to retire means more people working while dealing with chronic health conditions. Workplace injuries and illnesses rise. Productivity drops. And when those workers finally do exit the workforce, often because of health crises, they enter retirement sicker and more expensive to care for. Medicare and Medicaid costs spike, putting even more pressure on programs already facing insolvency. Perhaps most troubling is the erosion of trust. When people spend their entire lives contributing to systems like Social Security and retirement plans, they expect those systems to work. If they don't, trust in institutions collapses. People stop believing in government, in corporations, in the social contract that says if you work hard and play by the rules, you'll be okay. That loss of trust has political consequences. It fuels populism, extremism, and social fragmentation. When people feel abandoned by the system, they become willing to tear it down, even if they don't have a clear plan for what comes next. We're already seeing signs of this in rising political polarization and distrust in institutions. So what needs to change? That's a harder question. Fixing retirement security would require sweeping reforms. Strengthening Social Security by raising or eliminating the payroll tax cap, so higher earners contribute more. Bringing back pension-style guaranteed benefits, at least as an option alongside 401ks. Reducing the cost of healthcare so medical expenses don't wipe out savings. Making housing more affordable so people can build equity earlier in life. Raising wages so workers have surplus income to actually save. Reducing or eliminating student debt so young people can start saving decades earlier. Each of these solutions faces enormous political and economic resistance. But without them, the trajectory is clear. An entire generation will work longer, retire poorer, and live with less security than their parents. And the generation after them will face even worse conditions. This isn't inevitable. Other developed countries have managed to maintain stronger retirement systems through different policy choices, but it requires political will, long-term thinking, and a willingness to prioritize people over profits. And right now, those things are in short supply. So where does that leave young Americans? Many are doing what they can within a broken system, saving what little they can, learning about investing, trying to build side incomes, hoping things improve, but hope isn't a plan. And the weight of carrying an entire retirement on your own shoulders, with no pension, uncertain Social Security, skyrocketing costs, and stagnant wages is crushing. The real question isn't just whether individuals can save more or work harder. It's whether the system itself will be reformed before an entire generation reaches retirement age with nothing. Because if it's not, the cost won't just be measured in dollars. It'll be measured in broken promises, lost dignity, and a society that abandoned its most vulnerable when they needed support the most. If this breakdown helped you understand why so many young Americans feel like retirement is slipping out of reach, hit subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to see it, and drop a comment. Do you think you'll be able to retire? Or are you planning to work until you can't anymore? Because this conversation needs to happen now before it's too late to change course.